Good evening to you all. We have a great number of questions that have been sent in, and so we'll begin to get to those, or we won't begin to get through them. First question, and I apologize to those of you who may be hearing parts of this twice, but we had some technical problems last week. My 15-year-old son lies a lot, especially concerning his computer usage. He feels controlled, probably because I have been trying to control him his whole life. To me, his computer usage feels like his drug. He hates it when we limit it, and we can't just eliminate it because he needs it for some of his homework. So, you're right, computer usage can become, as much an addiction as just about anything else. It's very entertaining, really sucks us in, and it's become an increasing problem with kids and, frankly, with adults all over the world. But, of course, you brought up the fact, which is very honest of you, that you've been trying to control him his whole life, and so he feels controlled. And he's telling you a ton by his lying about his computer usage. If he felt unconditionally loved, he'd have no reason to lie to you. He'd feel safe. He'd tell you exactly what he was doing. So, you're right. Obviously, he does feel controlled, criticized, conditionally loved, and so he has to give you the right answers so you'll still like him. And so he tells you that he's using the computer less than he is. So, learn something from this. Learn something from the fact that he feels controlled, and really listen to him and begin to teach him something. So listening and teaching can go along together quite well. You can introduce him to a new way of living here with you. You can admit, say right off, if you're going to ever expect a child to tell the truth himself, what better example than for you to tell the truth about yourself? So you say, I have controlled you. I've been critical. I have not been unconditionally loving, which is exactly what you've needed from me all these years. And, I feel bad about that. So I would like to do things differently. I would like to practice loving you unconditionally while still teaching you true principles. So, explain to him that you understand why he would lie to you, because you have been critical and not unconditionally loving, and so you get it. You get why he would do that. But then explain to him that the cost of lying is severe. The cost of lying is that he feels separated from you and from everybody else whenever he lies. So explain to him that that's the reason you're concerned about his lying, that it affects him. Not, as almost every parent on the planet does, because it inconveniences or offends you. Because what parents almost uniformly say is, how could you lie to me? The emphasis, of course, then being, oh, you've done a terrible thing to me, and how dare you? You hurt my feelings. When we say it that way, our kids they don't sense love from us. They sense that we're concerned about ourselves. And the more we're concerned about ourselves, the more they feel unloved and are actually more likely to lie. So we get the opposite effect when we say, how could you do this to me? They're going to do it even more now. It's love that's going to break the cycle. So you begin by telling them the truth. Well, I have been controlling. I have not been unconditionally loving. And let's do something about that. So tell him, all I want from you is that you be honest with me and let me practice loving you unconditionally. So you give him an example. You say, here's an example of where I know you used the computer more than you said, and I was wrong to act disappointed and annoyed. But we do need to talk about how much you use the computer. You do have a right to do that. But before we get to that, let's talk about some ways that you could demonstrate that you're trying to let go of controlling this kid. Children respond so much better to being taught about limitations in some areas if we're not limiting them unnecessarily everywhere else. So you might look at some of the things that you do that control him in other areas. Like, parents tend to be critical and make these endless comments about, well, why do you wear your hair that way? Why are you wearing these clothes? Why don't you clean up your room? Consider the possibility that you might say to him something like this. And I'm not telling you what to say, I'm just giving you an example. You might say to him, I've been controlling in a lot of things that are foolish, telling you what to wear. Now, short of, going naked to school, but like my idea of style conflicting with yours, that's way too controlling on my part. And I'm not going to bother you about that. I'm not going to bother you about your hair, unless, of course, it violates some school rule about grooming. I'm not going to ask you to keep your room clean anymore. That's kind of ridiculous at your age. I mean, at 15, you're going to be gone from home in 3 years. And after that point, certainly you're going to keep your room like you want. So why should I bother you about it now? You're a big guy, almost a man. Well, or a young man, however you prefer to say that. 15-year-olds prefer to be referred to as young men rather than almost men, I can just tell you. So you describe a number of ways that you're going to let go of control. Then you might say, now I'm concerned about the use of the computer only because it does become addictive and becomes distracting to you in other things that you might want to accomplish. So you might go over with him, for example, what would reasonable computer use be in a day? How many hours? And certainly only after his home chores and schoolwork are done. As you do it this way, he can see you're trying to be reasonable. You're not just going, now you're doing it too much, which is a kind of a vague and ever oppressive thing to hear, because then they're always wondering what's too much. You agree on how much he'll use the computer and when and under what conditions, and then you say, if you meet those conditions, I'm not going to bug you. If I see you using the computer, I'm going to assume that you're keeping track of how long. And if in the beginning you don't trust entirely how long, I would recommend you just trust him at first. But if you feel like he's using the computer still far more than he's admitting to, you can go to Google, for example, or any search engine and type in computer timer. And there are programs that you can attach to a computer that will tell you exactly how much he's using the computer in a day. It might require that he have a separate login for the computer, but that's reasonable. He'll actually probably know how to set that up better than you. The idea is to communicate increasing trust for him and that you genuinely care about him, as much in your tone and attitude as in the words that you say. And if you do that, he's going to lose his reason to lie to you. And you may not see immediate effects, but loving him and teaching him simultaneously are certainly the ways to go. Here's a viewer who says, my employment situation is still uncertain, and as a result, I live with a constant low-level hum of fear. Most of the time, I don't think I feel like a victim, but based on my behavior, that's probably a lie. And that's very brilliant of you to observe. Often we recoil and say, well, I don't lie or I don't act like a victim, but the truth is usually found in how we feel and how we behave, much more than in the words we profess. Lots of complaining, you continue, goes on in my office, and I whine with the rest of them. So, clearly, you've convicted yourself as a victim, and that's okay. Just be honest about it, and you can begin to do something about it. Just recently, I've tried a new approach, you said. When people ask how I am, I say, I have no complaints whatsoever. Maybe if I act as if I have no complaints, I'll actually grow into it. Maybe. But saying that you have no complaints will really only help you if you see that it's true. If you don't believe it, simply pretending that everything is all right can actually become quite frustrating and becomes just a form of lying that will never lead us to real love and happiness. But you can mean it the more that you see that you have to be grateful for. So when somebody says, how are things? And you can say, I have nothing to complain about, because you see how much potential gratitude there is in your life. It's just it's impossible to feel grateful and unhappy at the same time. It will always be true that there will be people around us who don't understand us, people who treat us unfairly, people who are unkind, people who inconvenience us. But I've often recommended to people that they even keep a gratitude journal, gosh, if I can remember that I'm grateful for life and breath and health and any moment that I enjoy on earth, to experience the love of others and to share my love with them, if I can remember all the things I'm grateful for, which can be innumerable once you start the list, it's very difficult for me to complain. And I don't just mean, well, my life's better than somebody who's starving to death in the Sudan. No, I mean, all by myself, I have so many things to be grateful for, even when things are difficult. Remembering that becomes very difficult to feel like a victim. And then when you add to that another layer of understanding why people ever behave badly, rudely, they attack me, they're angry, when I understand that they really are drowning, there just isn't much for me to feel victimized about when it comes to people. So with gratitude and with an understanding of other people's motivations, I lose my sense of victimization toward people and toward circumstances. Very powerful thing when I'm not just pretending that life is good. Here's a woman who says, I've been married for 2 years to my husband Fred. Obviously I've changed his name, and I'm going to change some of the writing that I got just because it was fairly long, and I'm going to distill it into what I think are its important components. 2 years to my husband Fred, second marriages for both of us. He's angry a lot, and he says it's all because he hates my son, Jared, who's 24. My husband and I began our relationship long distance because I lived in the western United States and Fred lived in the east, 2,000 miles apart. And he couldn't move because he was still on probation for a couple of white-collar crimes that he says he did not commit. We've been married 2 years now, and Jason and I moved out east to be with Fred in January of this year. Jason does not have a job and sits around playing video games all day, an addiction that replaced his former addiction to alcohol, and this really irritates my husband. Fred says that I won't ever kick him out of my life, and he doesn't see how he, Fred, can be in my life as long as my son, Jared, is in it. I've been telling Fred for about 2 months now that our problems have nothing to do with Jared, but he can't hear me. He keeps blaming my son. My work is 2 to 4 hours away from Fred's home, so at best when, and this is in parentheses, when Fred isn't cheating via online dating, which is another separate problem, well, really not separate, but another problem, we see each other only on weekends. Fred has been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. He has a vicious temper and can be cruel. Justin is just plain better company for me here, out east, 2,000 miles away from my precious daughters, grandchildren, and friends. And then interestingly, I got a question from her husband, Fred, and he said, how can I stop hating my stepson so I can still maintain a sexual relationship with his mother? This is a lot of problems all in one little letter, but they really still all boil down to real love. You can see that Jared's behavior is, drowning. I mean, the kid just sits around and plays video games all day long, which is a way of escaping. And you can explain this to your husband, Fred, that Jared's doing the best he can, which may not be sufficient. We're not rationalizing what he's doing, but he's drowning. And Jason is not drowning to Fred. He's not doing any of this to irritate Fred. He's just being irresponsible and lazy and running from life. He can't be loving toward Fred, which is really what bugs Fred, is that Jason doesn't respect him, doesn't care about him, and I'm sure lets him know that with his behavior and his attitude. And then you can say to Fred, so, is it true that my son is being irresponsible and perhaps even an idiot? Well, yes. But, so, see, in saying that, you're showing your husband that you're really listening to him. Because I've heard thousands of these conversations, and my guess is that when your husband comes to you and says, that son of yours, blah, 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 you probably defend him. Well, but don't defend him. Say, you are absolutely right. the way that he's living is irresponsible, it's wrong, I suggest to you that it might make a difference to you if you see why he behaves like this. I've never really done a good job of unconditionally loving him, and now he's running from all the pain in his life, all of his sense of failure, and immersing himself in the escape of video games. So you're actually listening to your husband now instead of just saying but, and defending your son. Because the instant you defend Jared, your son, your husband will feel like you love him more than your husband. So it can't be a defense. You have to recognize the truth of what he's saying and then simply explain why, which is different than excusing him. Then at some point you're going to have to address your relationship with your husband. He may say that it's all your son, but obviously it's not. And I would suggest that you say to him, are you happy with the way our relationship is? Would you like it to be better? Well, it's pretty obvious that what we're doing isn't working. So would you be willing to do something strikingly different? And that's when I would suggest to him that the two of you read the Real Love and Marriage book together, that you complete the 40-day workbook together, and really work on your marriage. Now, we're going to get to your son here in a minute, and so you'll address both subjects at the same time. I just can't speak two subjects at one time. So tell Fred that you're doing your best to love both of them, both him and your son, and it's just simply not possible every moment to be attending first to him, to your husband, although emphasize that you're making him your first priority. Now, this is going to be difficult if he has a narcissistic personality disorder, like wildly difficult, because narcissists only see themselves in the world, period. And I think it's very likely that the two of you are going to require some in-person counseling or coaching in order to get over this. And even that may not be successful. But you can always give us a call and we can give you some suggestions about how to, or write me and I'll give you some suggestions about how to do this in-person counseling, because narcissists are very difficult to approach. Virtually impossible to approach by their partners, but sometimes will respond to the intervention or coaching of an outside third person. So you also need to talk to your partner about, his anger. When he gets angry and abusive and ugly, as you've described him here with a vicious temper, that's the time to not write while he's angry, but afterwards say, the anger that you feel is simply evidence that our relationship isn't working. And I think we need help, because the odds that you'll be able to work this out by yourself with a narcissist are slim. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be done. Just to do it alone is very difficult, because narcissists don't listen very well. Everything is about them, what they can get, what other people have done to them. It's just them, them, them. Now, can you address Jared? Yeah, you probably need to, both for Jared's benefit and for Fred's. Because if this is a kid who's 24 years old and is still sitting around playing video games without a job, what are you teaching him? Now, I realize that it seems as though if you don't give him a place to stay, he'll have no place. I get it. That's really not true. He's 24. He's not crippled in any way that you've described here. And it's quite possible for you to say to him, look, I'm going to continue to help you. I'll help you find a job. I'll give you a place to stay. I'll help you find an apartment. I will assist you in any number of ways, but 60 days from now, you'll be moved out. I'm arbitrarily making up how many days. That's up to you. But the longer you make it, the longer he'll put off doing it. Just like kids with a term paper. You give them 30 days, they do it in the last 2 days. You give them 15 days, they do it in the last 2 days. So why bother to give them 30 days? Same with your son. So you tell him in 60 days, I'll even help move you into a homeless shelter, whatever. But in 60 days, you won't be here. And I'm not kicking you out. This is way different than throwing a kid out. What I'm doing is requiring you to exercise a sense of responsibility that up to this point I have been foolish in not requiring, because by providing you with a place to stay and do nothing, all I've done is make it easy for you to do that. And you need more out of your life than this. So there's a lot that you need to say to your son and to your husband, because the situation you're in now, you're being manipulated by everybody. And nobody's really happy, because as long as it's an exchange of conditional love, your husband isn't feeling loved, your son isn't feeling loved. Notice that your husband's narcissism is kind of confirmed when he says, how do I stop hating my ex-son? Not so that we'll be a happier family, not so my wife will be happier, not so that my stepson will be happier. What does he say? So I can maintain a sexual relationship with his mother, which is for whose benefit? His. And that's kind of the pattern with narcissists. Even when they do things for you, it's so that they can get what they want. So this is going to take a lot more than I can describe to you in just a few minutes. I'm just kind of giving you a basic outline and some recommendations that you get some additional help. Here's a viewer who says, I'm 23 years old. I live in Germany, and my girlfriend, 25, is from Bulgaria. We lived together for 8 months here, and then she had to go back to Bulgaria to finish her studies there, wanting to come back to me after that. Our long-distance relationship so far has lasted another 11 months. We planned on living together, but something has happened. In Bulgaria, 5 months ago, she got to know an Italian and is in an affair with him. I got to know him while I stayed there for 3 weeks, and he really is a pathological narcissist and liar. I didn't know we were going to have 2 narcissists in one video chat. Even her friends see that, and she knows it too, but she has fallen for his charm and passion. He manipulates her totally, and since then, she has become different, sometimes saying oddly cold things to me, which she later regrets. Again, narcissists are completely self-absorbed, but they can often be very charming, because they've learned that in order to get everything they want for themselves, they have to pay people off. Narcissists recognize rather brilliantly, as well as anybody else, maybe better, that in most relationships it's a trading of imitation love. And so narcissists will pour on the charm, they'll appear to listen, they'll flatter you. It's mostly flattery, because in the end, narcissists aren't willing to give up their power to anybody else. But they'll flatter you, and then in exchange, they expect your complete and utter loyalty to serving them. They just use people. They understand the commerce of imitation love. You continue, although she still loves me, she can't let go of him. She was raped numerous times by an Iranian 5 years ago over the course of several months when she had to stay in his apartment, and subconsciously, the Italian reminds her of him. Same voice, similar appearance, behavior patterns. I'm worried about her and our relationship. So she must be a very empty person to have experienced all this pain and trauma in her life, and yet to allow the trauma to continue. But see, it's a willing thing. It's not being done to her. She's getting enough from this narcissist out of the trade, enough flattery, safety, pleasure, whatever. She's getting enough that she's willing to give him her complete loyalty. And so it's a willing trade. She knows he's not good for her and tells me he's terrible to her and should go to hell. She wanted to never see him again, but now she's back together with him. It's a very common pattern with narcissists. Narcissists become so selfish to the point that they usually end up alienating everyone, because people catch on to their selfishness. Then they leave. But see, then the narcissist will pour on the charm even more, add a little more imitation love to the mix. People come back to them, but then they end up leaving them again. It's really quite a yo-yo effect with narcissists. She's lost and confused, you say, also because her mother has become diagnosed with cancer and she cries all day. I've been there on Skype with all my real love for her, and she's grateful, but still she sleeps with that liar and aggressive, self-destructive, compulsive, hurtful person. He calls her terrible names with foul language when he does not get what he wants. So you've got to wonder, if he treats her badly, why does she stay with him? Again, it's the commerce of imitation love. Many people stay in abusive relationships because even though they do get abused and used, they get something out of it. And he makes her afraid, with his violent language and behavior, of losing his approval. And that's terrifying to her. Even more important to most people than gaining approval or gaining imitation love is the fear that they will lose it. And a narcissist will lay it right out on the line. If you don't do what I want, I will hate you, leave you, and they keep people frightened. They keep people who are in these brief relationships with them as though they are hostages, and that's what he's doing with her. I can't call her because he switches off her phone when they're together. I'm desperate because I know she loves me. You kind of need to get over that. The possibility that she unconditionally loves you, considering what she falls for here and what she trades with, the possibility that she unconditionally loves you is about zero. So she may care for you as much as she can, but she has no idea what unconditional love is. Or she wouldn't feel trapped by this man who's so abusive and ugly and self-centered. So you're wondering and you continue, what can I do about this, since she doesn't want to be with him? She even lies to people, you say, and says that she's out of the relationship with him when she's not. This is a hard thing to live with, but you need to get that she does not know what unconditional love is. If she is satisfied with the trading of imitation love and wants to stay in that relationship, you can't stop it. Now, you can offer her real love. You can offer her the truth about the way she's living, but you can't force people. And if she continues this relationship with him, like you said, she's been gone for 11 months. At some point, when a relationship is sick enough, you have to ask yourself, do I really want to try to revive a relationship that's nearly dead? Or would it be more healthy if I simply learned to become more unconditionally loving myself and attracted more potentially healthy partners into my life? At some point it becomes pretty fruitless to continue to insist that she get a principle that she's not ready to get, to try to revive something that's dead. It becomes a great deal of wasted effort. I realize you care about her, but you can't make her be different. So you've got a decision to make. Keep after this or move on and find a healthier relationship with somebody who is healthier than she is. Because right now it doesn't sound like she is very healthy. Here's somebody who says, I'd like to understand the veto principle better. On Saturday, my husband spent thousands of dollars and bought a sand rail, which is like a dune buggy, but with no doors. It's always been on his wish list, but we hadn't talked about getting one right now. I was angry and shocked. I wanted to veto it, but I couldn't remember the parameters around what you've explained before, and I also wasn't being loving. I felt like a victim because he was behaving differently with money from what we had agreed to, which is that we need to talk about how we're going to spend our money when the purchase is over $50. This was completely out of character for him. I know he's empty. After making calls, I was reminded that when we're empty, we turn to things that bring us pleasure, power, and so on. And I know that he's been under a lot of stress at work, and even more from choosing to deal with his ex-wife when his son recently chose to move in with us. I was able to feel loved and eventually excited for him because I'm learning to care about his happiness. I'd like to know if supporting him and loving him through this would communicate that this type of behavior is okay. So first, if you already made the $50 agreement and then he went out and bought this multi-$1,000 item, what he did clearly did violate your agreement and was therefore wrong. It violates the primary decision, which would state that he would care about his relationship with you more than anything else. And it also violates the principle of the veto, which says that in a mutually loving relationship, either partner can veto a decision that affects or could potentially affect the other partner in a negative way. Put in a really simple way, if I really care about my partner, why would I ever do something that would hurt or frighten her? And since that's the case, she would have a right to veto any decision that I would make that would hurt or frighten her. It's a simple way to put it. So why would he do that? He obviously didn't want to consult with you, and that's a sign that something is wrong. Either something is seriously wrong in his life, he's even more empty than you had supposed. Or in many cases, people do something wrong or make wrong decisions like this, when there's something deeply wrong with their behavior. When people are out, for example, alcoholics who are secretly drinking will behave like this. People who are being unfaithful will behave like this. Guys who are using porn will behave like this. They get so empty to the point where they become re-immersed in their addiction, and then they start acting out in other ways. It's just a sign that something's really awry. So that's one possibility. But another possibility that's very likely is that he's not feeling loved with you. Like you said, you're just learning to love him and accept him, and if he's going out and making these decisions without you, he's obviously not feeling included by you in your life. So I can't tell you that what percentage of this would be in some measure due to your behavior toward him, but you can virtually bet that some of it is. And if you want to learn what that is, I would suggest you ask him. I would ask you, how often are you having couples meetings? How often are you reading out of the Real Love and Marriage book together? Are you being loving in your behavior and attitude toward him? And then, tell the truth to him about yourself. Say, I'm paying more attention to what I want in life. That would be just one possibility that you could say. I want to be happier, and I'm seeing ways where I'm not contributing to my happiness and to the health of our marriage. And then you tell him the truth about the ways that you have not been loving toward him. Recently, be very specific. I wasn't loving toward you when I did this, and then tell him, that you want to do something about that. You want to do whatever it takes for the two of you to function as a single unit, as partners, and you want to take complete responsibility for your part in it. When a partner senses that their partner really cares about them, it's very unlikely that they'll continue to hide things from a loving partner or act independently from a loving partner. So you go tell him the truth about yourself and tell him that you'd be willing to do anything to change the way that you're obviously not relating, and see what happens. Here's a viewer who says, I believe that a family should dress appropriately, respectfully, when they attend Sunday worship services. Like for a boy, dress pants, dress shirt, not blue jeans and stuff. And my children constantly complain to my wife about this. And her thoughts on the matter are different than mine, but I think out of respect she supports my point of view. I can tell that I'm not being loving as my mood changes, as well as the way I talk to them based on whether they happily wear dress clothes or whether they complain and struggle about doing so. I'd like them to learn about respect of environment, but I'm failing to teach them that as well. Brilliant of you to see, because the instant you become irritated with them, they're not learning a thing. They are not hearing what you're trying to tell them about respect or clothes or anything else. It doesn't seem loving, you continue, to say, well, you just go ahead and pick out whatever you want, you'll figure it out sometime, just like it doesn't seem loving to say to somebody, go to the fridge and eat anything. What I struggle with is what latitude I have as a loving parent to set a dress code or standard for events and how to teach them the importance of it. Originally, I did this out of a sense of pride, so I wouldn't be judged as a parent for what my children wore or how people would comment on how cute they looked. But since learning about real love, I've tried to recognize those times and make more loving decisions. So as a side note, my wife has mentioned that she's tired of dealing with this, and I don't blame her. It's misery for her on Sunday mornings when this comes up, and to top it off, I usually give her the eye roll or some other unloving gesture that leaves her feeling alone. So sit down with your kids and say, remember, they need to feel loved by you. And so if you will begin by telling them the truth and say, there's a lesson I've been trying to teach you, but I've been teaching you badly. The most important thing you could learn here at home, or frankly at church, which is where you're taking them, is to be loving. And here I am telling you that we're going to go to a place where they're going to teach love, and I'm trying to get you to go there in an unloving way. So that's pretty hypocritical of me. You'll really have your kids' attention about now because you're telling the truth about you and how you are wrong, and kids love to hear that. And then you explain to them, only after you've been wrong, the why of what you're doing, why there are standards. Teach them that about respect for God and for other people, and that one of the ways that we indicate our respect is by how we speak, by how we behave, and by how we dress. So if you go to a formal event, for example, where the standard dress is higher than usual, and you show up in t-shirts and cutoffs, that's a clear declaration that you don't respect the event. That's all people could possibly conclude from that. Same thing about going to church. Church is a different place than school. It's a different place than playing out in the backyard with the pigs. We're going there to have some kind of communication, and this would vary according to people's beliefs, but pretty much everybody I know, as they go to church, they're having some kind of communication with God, toward whom you might indicate, because I think this is what you're trying to say, you're trying to teach them to be respectful toward God, which makes sense in almost every set of religious beliefs that I know of. Explain that you as an adult conform to dress standards everywhere you go. You don't walk into the formal dining room of a hotel dressed sloppily or in your work clothes. So it's not something that you're just imposing on them. It's pretty much the way the world works. How people are dressed, in addition, kind of sets the tone for how they feel. It's a demonstrated fact that kids at schools, and they've actually studied this, kids at schools who wear standard, appropriate, modest, clean-cut uniforms behave differently than when they're simply allowed to set their own dress code. There's something about setting a standard of dress that makes our behavior tends to conform to how we are dressed. They've done many other studies that show that our behavior can even be changed by the facial expressions that we use, by the hand gestures we use. We're affected by everything around us. And dress is just simply one of those. So you're not trying to impose, you're trying to teach them something that will be a valuable life lesson. So you might tell them, that you're going to do this differently, that you're going to simply teach them what is required, and because they live in a circumstance as your children where you have been appointed to be the teacher, you're going to require that they learn certain lessons. They don't have to do everything. You don't want to control them in every respect, but you're there to teach them. For example, you don't give them an option whether they can go to school. No, because it's too important that they go to school. You're not going to give them an option about how they dress for church because it's too important a lesson. Now, mind you, I'm only reflecting your beliefs here, not giving you mine. And it's important that when they complain on Sunday morning, you do not wince. If a child whines and you scrunch up your face, you get angry, you get impatient, anything, what the child has done is invited you onto the field of death where we use getting and protecting behaviors and imitation love, and you have accepted the invitation. Because as soon as the child is griping and whining and you respond with anything less than love, you are right on the field of death with them and everybody dies. That's the moment when you need to teach them. So you just ask them simple questions so that they learn. You say, so do you respect, speaking of church, do you respect God or not? Yes or no? You don't pause when they complain. You come immediately say, do you respect God? Most children will follow this reasoning, yes. So do you respect that building that has been designated as his house? Well, and see, they're going to pause there because they realize that they've been trapped. Well, of course you would. If I respect you as a person, I'm going to respect your house. And you might give them that analogy. If I respect you, I'll respect the room in which you are. I'll respect everything attached to you. And you teach them this lesson every time they complain. You don't tell them, stop whining. You don't tell them to change their attitude. You simply repeat the lesson. And if you repeat the lesson without irritation, children very quickly catch on that you're just going to keep teaching them and not dive into this invitation of theirs to behave hysterically and be on the field of death with them. Here's a woman who says, my question is, why do I find it so hard to be loving, using the definition of real love, with my teenage girls? When using the principles of real love in the rest of my life, I've seen incredible results, but I find it harder with them. I find it easier to shout at my two teenage girls than to be loving all the time. Sometimes I do all right with them. At school, as a teacher, I manage it most of the time. In my relationship, the transformation has been remarkable, but sometimes the behavior of my girls is just too much. I know they don't feel love, neither would I. I know that I project my fear onto them, and I want to control them so that I feel like I'm a good mother. I also know that they're well past the age of being controlled. I don't think I fully understand the principle of loving 10 times and teaching once with my children. They now do chores, and they are accepting of consequences, such as things that are left in the living room when they're not there go in the shed. However, I'm not loving enough for these things to always run smoothly. So, with other people, you don't have as great expectations as you do with your girls. With your girls, your expectations are huge, in part because you have invested so much in them. We tend to have more expectations from somebody or something the more we invest in it. And you have poured your time, effort, love, attention, caring, and all that into these kids. And when they behave badly, what you hear is this enormous ingratitude and disrespect for you. And that's where you screw it up. Because as parents, we feel like, and boy, we don't say it out loud unless we're really provoked, but as parents, we feel like, and occasionally when we're irritated, we actually say these words, after all I've done for you, how could you blank? Be disrespectful, be ungrateful, and so on. Well, the fact is that after all we've done for them, that's just our job. That's what we're supposed to do, is love them and love them and love them again and love them endlessly, and then frequently teach them. But we feel like they owe us their obedience, respect, and it goes on and on. It's not owed to us. And as soon as we expect it, we're doomed, because then we take it personally. Now, should children be respectful, obedient, and all those things? Oh, yes, they should. I'm not saying otherwise. But they should do those things so they can be happy. And that's why we teach a child respect, obedience, responsibility, and so on. Or like the man that we just talked about, teaching his children to have appropriate dress standards for church. It would be just one of many things. The idea is to teach them these things so that they will be more responsible and feel happier in their lives. But we get confused about that. We think it should be done to please us. And so the more you see that you're being selfish when you get irritated, the more you'll begin to be capable of laughing at yourself and saying, oh, this just is so stupid. Not to castigate yourself, not to be critical, not to make yourself feel bad, but just to see how ridiculous it is for you to be irritated at a child who is simply drowning, simply doesn't understand properly what they're supposed to do and is behaving out of a sense of pain. So they don't owe you anything. Our job as parents is to love them one way, and then as we become confident in that, as we become confident in our role as teachers and in loving them, their mistakes become just information. So you've got these two teenage girls who behave sometimes in ways that are not productive. Then you just realize, okay, this isn't productive, so what do I need to teach them? As opposed to, how has this inconvenienced me? Makes a big difference. Here's Here's a woman who says, I was just listening to an archived video chat from earlier this June in response to a lady that has an extremely narcissistic husband. Goodness, that's 3 references to narcissism in one chat. Who needs approval from every woman that he comes across. In the email, she stated how their monies are separate, and you told her this is not how a partnership functions. At least that's the way I interpreted it. And ideally, no. Ideally, in a mutually loving relationship, you would never separate your funds because it's just a reflection of how your lives are separated. People start separating things, and things tend to just tear in two. There would be exceptions, however. So, for example, like if you have one partner who's an addictive spender, it may be necessary for one partner to step in and say, we need to separate the finances for your benefit until you become capable of handling spending, with the goal being that you'll eventually go back together with the money. Just like a drug addict in a family would not be given equal responsibility for the dispensing of medication. You would more closely watch the behavior of a drug addict. You continue, our finances are separate because I was so fanatical about the money at the beginning that I created major issues in this area. Then we blended the money, which he didn't want to do, but due to my insistence, he folded and did it anyway. In learning about real love, and after he stated he wanted a divorce, I thought it would be the loving thing to separate them, since this is what he wanted anyway, and would address my control issue that I have in regard to money. Well, control about everything, really, but this was just one point of contention. So it sounds like you had a control problem, and that temporarily it might be better, or might have been better, to separate your money so that he wouldn't feel controlled by you, so he could have money of his own that he could spend. Okay, like I say, there are exceptions where temporarily you might want to do that, as long as the eventual goal is to be headed toward unity in everything, including money. So he took over 90% of the bills, you continue, on his own accord, and felt relieved that I agreed to do this. We don't save for anything together. No future plans of any sort. He's always talking about cars and boats he wants, but never talks about anything together as a team or a future. I feel like I needed to relinquish my control over the money, but now I feel like we're back to being just boyfriend-girlfriend, which is why I was suggesting that when we begin to separate things, we begin to separate money or anything else, we begin to unravel our connection in everything else in the relationship. As I'm writing this, I'm realizing how upset I am about it. Must have been stuffing these feelings, and I'm obviously feeling empty. Do you think it was a wise decision to let go of the finances? If it was causing tension, maybe temporarily, but obviously the goal here is for the two of you to be truthful with each other, to feel unconditionally accepted by each other, which is why I suggest that, here you are saying, now we're back to boyfriend-girlfriend. Well, this is about far more than money. And why I would suggest that the two of you study the principles as found in the marriage book, for example, and get at the root of the many ways that you don't feel supported and loved by each other. And the money is just one of them. You're going to uncover lots of things that the two of you do not talk about as you go through the 40-day workbook, for example. And you go on some more about the money issues, but I would emphasize that it's not about money. The two of you need to be talking about everything, or these divides just increase, and eventually the two of you have common ground about nothing. So it's about, with my partner, I need to always be telling the truth about my mistakes, my flaws, my fears, my confusion, my selfishness. And as I do that, it creates an environment safe enough that my partner becomes more likely to feel loved, safe enough that my partner might even go a step further and tell the truth about herself. But it begins with me, and in this case I would suggest that it begins with you. You tell the truth about yourself to your partner over and over again, as perhaps guided by the principles in the marriage book. We'll just give you some ideas and see if that makes a difference. And then you'll be able to increasingly solve the individual issue about money. Here's a viewer who says, I'm in a real love group and I have a question. I'm feeling lots of lots of imitation love coming forth in me regarding one person in the group, a man whose approval I would like. I noticed that I started using all kinds of getting behaviors in my head and in group. I know I'm being empty and stupid, and I wonder if you have any ideas how I can eliminate this. I'm annoying myself and probably others with my behavior. Clinging, approval, wanting to look good, sound good, being the smartest person in the room, charming, and listening to him, but for all the wrong reasons. So, you have a bit of a crush on this guy. And you would just love to have his approval. And the more that we want the approval of any one person, the more we will manipulate them to get it. And of course, we can only manipulate with lies and all the getting behaviors. So it's wonderful that you're seeing this. And just keep remembering that you're in this group to create opportunities to feel unconditionally loved. I can only feel unconditionally loved. You can only feel unconditionally loved when you do nothing to get it. So notice, I'm not telling you stop doing anything. No, just when you're in the group, if you speak or behave or anything, think about what you're doing and say, is there any part of me that's doing this so that somebody will notice, so that this particular guy will notice, or it could be anybody, so that they will accept me, so that I will be more desirable. If that's the reason you're doing it, just admit it. Just say, that's what I'm doing. And the more you tell the truth about it, the less you will do it. You won't have to say stop it. Nobody else will have to tell you to stop it. You'll just do it less, the more you're truthful about it. And as you do it less, as you're being more authentic about who you really are instead of manipulating people, you will experience the powerful sensation of people accepting you unconditionally. I can remember when I first started going to groups, in the beginning, the thing that made the biggest difference to me was to ask myself, before I spoke on any occasion, why am I speaking? And I tell you, for a long time, I didn't say anything, because I realized that I was trying to get people to like me all the time. And then I began to learn how to tell the truth about myself, how to tell the truth that I was empty and afraid and manipulating and so on. And then it just felt great for people to accept me for who I was, warts and all. So just asking yourself the question will make a big difference without beating yourself up for making mistakes. Here's somebody who says, you once said to me and my partner, Fred, that being critical of one another was destroying our relationship. I had a lot of difficulty when Fred would try to teach me things. He would do it a lot at every encounter. I found it difficult to feel accepted as I was. A lot of the time he wanted me to change things about me that he found inconvenient. I'm certain I did the same with him, wanting him to dress differently, have a job, take a shower, so on. Is this a good example of what you were talking about? If Fred had been able to teach me lovingly, what would it have looked like? When we're being unconditionally loving, in the first place, our primary emphasis is on describing the mistakes that we're making, rather than pounding our partner with their mistakes. So he might still have pointed out to you, if you were loving, some things that you were doing that were unproductive. But here's the difference. When I really care about you, what I say is, Susie, I've noticed over the past days, weeks, months, that you exhibit a certain pattern of behavior. And then I would describe the behavior. And when I see you doing that, I've noticed that you don't look happy. You don't look happy yourself, and it seems like the people you're relating with aren't relating with you very well either. And so I'm not asking you to stop this behavior, but I am suggesting that it seems to be not contributing to your happiness. So I wondered if you wanted to talk about it, if you wanted to share how you felt about it, if you wanted to examine some possible behaviors that might help change this. So whether it's about getting a job or taking a shower or dressing different, you can talk about any of those things. But if I say to you, I'm not asking you to change, all I'm saying is that it doesn't seem to be making you happier or your relationships healthier. People can hear that much of the time, not always. Some people can't hear any kind of comments about their behavior at all. But it's much more acceptable than if I come to you and say, you know, when you do this, I really don't like it and I wish you'd stop. Now I am controlling you. Now I am criticizing you. Now there's almost no way that you could feel my unconditional concern for you. So that's what unconditional loving would look like as he was trying to teach you something. And he wouldn't be trying to teach you all the time. That's the other thing, is that people can only hear so many comments before they just max out. So I might make a potentially positive or a comment that would contribute to my partner's well-being, a couple times a week maybe. But when you go every day to your partner and say, I don't like it when you know, even if you're saying it with their benefit in mind, people can only hear up to a certain point and then they're done. And if somebody can't hear you and you keep speaking, who's the fool? You continue. Is part of the problem that I choose partners who tend to be critical? I know this seems like a stupid question, but can I choose differently? How do I gauge what is too much criticism? We tend to reenact the environment that we came from, even if we didn't like it. So it's very likely that you came from a home that was very critical, and then you would tend to not only be critical yourself, but you would tend to allow a partner to be critical toward you. If you're used to it, if you're used to that kind of exchange, you let people criticize you so that you won't lose their approval. We wear these signs on our forehead. People can smell us from across the room. We've become accustomed to a certain combination of imitation love that we then tend to repeat with everybody around us. And we're all so sensitive to each other's getting and protecting behaviors and use of imitation love that we can spot the people who are used to trading with us in exactly the way our parents did. So that's why we tend to marry people who are like one or both of our parents. It's just familiar. It's not necessarily because it's something we enjoyed. We just repeat what we know. And so how are we going to get out of this? You'd have to be different. You can't pretend it. You'd have to have enough familiarity with real love, both receiving it and giving it, that the old patterns of imitation love would no longer be attractive to you. And when they're not, then when somebody comes along who offers you the same combination of imitation love that has always fooled you in the past, then you won't fall for it again. You will find it unattractive. You'll be saying, that just doesn't make sense. Because by then you will have had enough taste of the real thing that the imitation love will become unappetizing to you. So yes, is part of the problem that you choose partners who tend to be critical. And that will change as you have more familiarity with and affinity for real love. So I recommend that to you. So it's been delightful being with you all this Tuesday evening, and I look forward to talking to you again a week from today. And between now and then, as always, remember that it's always about real love.